All right, let's dive into this absolutely incredible story from the book of Acts. Picture this. You're on the high seas, caught in a violent storm, the ship is literally being torn apart, and everyone around you has completely given up. But then, right out of that total despair, a single voice rises up, and it's a prisoner who speaks a word that changes absolutely everything.
Can you even imagine that feeling? For days, they've been in this relentless tempest. No sun, no stars to guide them, nothing. And the crew, the soldiers, the passengers, they all hit a breaking point. The Bible is so raw here, we finally gave up all hope. This isn't just being scared anymore. This is the cold, quiet acceptance that it's over. The situation could not be more dire. And we're not talking about a small group of people either. On that ship, there were 276 souls. You got seasoned sailors, a Roman centurion, prisoners in chains, and every single one of them was staring death in the face. The stakes were just astronomically high.
To really get the level of hopelessness here, you have to understand their state. The storm had been raging for so long that people had just stopped eating. And that wasn't just, a lack of appetite. It was a sign of deep, deep despair. They were physically wrecked and mentally exhausted, thinking, what's the point? Every bit of human skill had failed them, and now hope itself was gone. And it's right here, in this moment of complete silence and resignation, that the whole story just pivots on a dime. One man, a prisoner named Paul, gets up and stands among them. Just imagine that scene, the groaning timber of the ship, the howling wind, and then suddenly, a voice cuts right through the hopelessness.
So, you gotta ask, right? How does a prisoner suddenly command the attention of everyone on board? Well, this part of the story is all about Paul's journey from being the guy they completely ignored to becoming the one voice of authority they desperately needed to hear. See, we have to remember Paul already had some serious credibility here, even if they didn't want to admit it. Before they even left the port at Crete, he had warned them. He told them this was going to happen. He predicted this exact disaster. They blew off his advice, and now, well, they were living out the consequences.
Now, on the surface, this might sound a little like a classic, "I told you so," but it's so much more strategic than that. Paul isn't just trying to rub it in their faces. It's a mild rebuke, yeah, but it's really a simple statement of fact, and it's designed to do one thing: make them listen. He's basically saying, my last words prove true, so you might want to pay really close attention to what I'm about to say next.
And this is where he makes that shift from the past to the future. He's reminded them of his vindicated warning, and now he delivers this incredibly bold, authoritative promise. It's a complete 180 from the despair everyone else is feeling. And right here, you see his absolute certainty. In the middle of a storm that promised nothing but death, Paul declares that not a single life will be lost. The ship? Yeah, the ship is doomed, but every single person will survive. This is the first real ray of hope they've had in days, a direct word that just flies in the face of all the physical evidence around them.
So where in the world is all this confidence coming from? Paul wasn't just some expert sailor or a really positive thinker. He immediately tells them the source of his assurance, and it's not from him. It's a direct supernatural message from God.
This is the bedrock of his authority. And listen to how he says it: "The God to whom I belong and whom I serve." In front of pagan sailors and Roman soldiers, Paul isn't hiding his faith. He's declaring his identity. He's making it clear that the message he's delivering comes from a very recent, very personal, and very divine encounter. The angel's message basically had three key parts. First, it was a personal comfort for Paul. Do not be afraid. Second, it was a confirmation of his mission. The storm wasn't going to stop him because he had to stand trial before Caesar in Rome. It was a divine appointment. And third, and this is just incredible, an amazing act of grace. For Paul's sake, God was giving the lives of everyone else on that ship.
This whole event becomes this powerful lesson, doesn't it? It's about what it means to have an anchor for your soul when the entire world around you is just falling apart. It's all about a divine promise that completely overrides our desperate circumstances.
And you can just see the two opposing forces right here. On one side, you've got the human reality, the storm, the darkness, the starvation, the fact that all the experts had failed. But on the other side, you have the divine promise that Paul was clinging to, an angel's word, God's sovereign plan, and a prophecy that they would all survive. Faith was the only bridge that connected those two realities.
And here's the best part. Paul doesn't just keep this faith to himself, he transfers it to them. He tells them to keep up your courage, not because the storm is dying down, because it isn't, but because he has faith that God's word is true. He's anchoring their hope not in their changing circumstances, but in the reliability of God himself.
But there was one last detail. The prophecy included a shipwreck. They still had to run aground on an island. And this is such a critical point. God's plan doesn't always mean we get to avoid the hard stuff. Sometimes the shipwreck is the necessary path to the rescue. Survival was guaranteed, but it was going to come through the wreckage. So, what does this 2,000-year-old story about a storm at sea have to do with us today? Well, it gives us a really powerful blueprint for how we can find and offer hope right in the middle of our own personal storms, whether they're financial or relational or spiritual. Paul's example gives us a pretty clear roadmap. First, when everyone else is silent with despair, you speak up. Next, don't just offer some vague positivity. Boldly urge courage. Then, be really humble and clear about where your hope is coming from, your divine source. After that, declare your faith publicly to inspire others. And finally, be willing to accept that sometimes the only way to be rescued is to go through the shipwreck.
And that really brings us to the final critical question this whole story leaves us with. When the storms of your life are raging, when you can't see the sun or the stars, and when all human expertise has failed you, what is the anchor you're holding on to? What is the promise that holds you steady?